Welcome, welcome, everybody. Thanks for downloading another episode of Wigs for Whigs. I'm Joe Cook, and I'm joined once again by our political panel, Judge Eddie DeFazio, Dr. Michael Buxbaum, and educator Bill Venezia. And there's been, as always, these last few weeks, a lot going on since we last met. We're going to try to focus on a couple topics today. I guess I'll start with, did you all get your invitation to the group chat to discuss war plans?
Yeah, I did. I mean, how could you expect anything other than that from an administration, the first administration that basically its handling of documents? I mean, it's just you can't make it up. And I think the whole acceptance of this by Mike Waltz that it was his responsibility is throwing cover to the Secretary of Defense.
But he's not really taking responsibility, Mike Waltz. He's saying he's suggesting that like the journalist somehow snuck his way onto his phone contact list and was basically hacked himself into this group chat.
A great national security advisor.
I think the real issue is that our Secretary of Defense is a liar, out and out liar. Yep. And it's like it's like Watergate, to overuse the term gate, but it's the cover up that's the problem.
Yeah.
And when you see our Secretary of Defense interviewed, the way he carries himself and the way he speaks, it's very worrisome. It is, but let's just say, who knows why the people who were on the chat were on it? We don't know. It shouldn't have happened. It was definitely a security breach. But we have to be concerned. We have to be concerned about the reaction from the people who are responsible for that sort of thing.
My point is that both parties, when something happens, they never admit to mistakes. They try to cover it up. So, Mike Waltz kind of sort of said, he runs the show, but, it wasn't exactly saying we screwed up. And the other people were blaming everybody else. But I'm 100% sure if it was the other way, and if it was the old administration and Kamala Harris was on it and Lloyd Austin and Jake Sullivan, they would do the same thing. I doubt they will say, I'm sorry, we messed up. Nobody ever does that in politics, and that's unfortunate. The good thing is, though, that hopefully it's being investigated. People are being called to explain it, and hopefully we'll find out what happened. I mean, most likely it was somebody with the initials of JG, and they probably thought it was somebody else, and they let him in. But they should have never had that type of conversation, obviously, on a type of a platform that anybody can potentially get in. But I just think that the sad part about it is that in politics, nobody admits to mistakes, and people then know it's a mistake. You don't have to be Einstein to realize that if you are the ordinary person, and that's why nobody has any trust in politicians.
Well, at least the Democrats aren't saying lock them up.
Well, they are talking. Some are saying are asking for resignations.
Well, no, but I'm not being funny about this. I mean, Hillary Clinton, all right, makes a mistake, and the reaction from the Republicans, right from the top, are lock her up. All right, and it continued and continued and still continues. Okay, and I think in this case, to the credit of the Democrats, they're not saying that sort of thing. I agree with your analysis, Doc, that I think it was somebody who had the same initials. I'd love to know who it was. I don't think we need Elon Musk to investigate this to get to the bottom of it. All right. So
the thing is,
it's a shame.
If that is the case, where it was just somebody with the same initials, which is certainly plausible, the fact is that Steve Waltz and Pete Hegseth have been saying, well, we never had this Jonah Goldberg in our phone to begin with. So I don't understand how he got there. And they're coming up with all these crazy theories about how he got into their phone. No, I mean, maybe you chose the wrong JG initials person to add, but he was on your contacts list. I mean, it's they won't even admit to that part that just he was on Waltz's contacts list on his phone, and that's how he accidentally got chosen and added to the group chat. Like even that very basic part of it, they refuse to admit to.
Well, they did a good job scrubbing the files of the Defense Department to get rid of any notation of DEI. Especially, they got rid of Enola Gay. You can't even make it up. I mean, it's so absurd.
Oh, we can come to that in a little bit. There's a few things about the Doge and all that stuff that I want to talk about. Let's just stay on this for a little bit, because you know how serious was this as a security risk?
I think it was very serious. I think anything to do with bombings or strategy is extremely serious. And you know what? I think it goes to the question of policy too, the underlining policy. Why are we basically doing the carrying the water of Saudi Arabia in a proxy war with Yemen? Why? And there's only one reason for that. The reason is that we're currying favor with the Saudi princes, and we're also covering favor with Netanyahu, who the Houthis have been lobbing missiles at. And after this attack, they lobbed 3 missiles. They were all intercepted by Israel. So if you were to speak about the policy, you'd be basically excoriated by the current administration. And it's a sad state of affairs, the position of America in a lot of these things.
Well, if you look at the group chat, J.D. Vance was actually articulating your position. He was saying that it's not our business to do that. That's nothing to do with America. But I would actually disagree, because you have a group of essentially rebels, or terrorists, if you like, who are supported and supplied by Iran. And it's not only about Israel. They are disrupting global supply chains. People are afraid to go to the Red Sea and go through the Suez Canal. So they have to go around the whole, Africa, basically, to get stuff into Asia. So they are disrupting the whole chain of economy. So I think we do need to address that and try to destroy them. However, the question, which I think is a better one, is, can we really do that? Because nowadays we live in a world where a very primitive group can develop drones, and very cheap drones for that matter. This can be done very cheaply, and they can move from one place to another and launch them. So that's the hard part. Can we really destroy that group? I mean, Saudi Arabia tried it and they couldn't do it. And it can be done in a very low-cost way by these very cheap drones.
If we had the inclination to diplomacy, we could do something that the first Bush did. Get a coalition of our allies who are shrinking daily to basically do something about it. And when you have collective will, rather than a unilateral action, those things succeed, i.e. the first Gulf War. Not the second, the first. But this administration doesn't believe in diplomacy. It believes in alienating our friends and basically helping our enemies. I guess the policy should be called, let's make Russia great again.
That's a whole new topic.
I'm as hawkish as anybody. I mean, I have no problem with us going after the Houthis. I think it is valuable, as the doctor was saying, for a number of reasons. But it's just, again, I have to come back to just how incompetently this administration is functioning with the whole group chat situation. I mean, you could say, we could speculate about how the Biden administration would have reacted to a similar kind of whoopsie daisy, but they never had that problem. They didn't invite a reporter to a group chat where they were discussing attack plans and then claim that they weren't war plans, they were attack plans, and somehow that's a different thing. So, Jonah Goldberg, you didn't hear our war plans, you heard our attack plans, and therefore you're a liar.
The cover up is it's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's juvenile, and the American public shouldn't have to be subjected to this sort of thing. And I'm putting aside the mistake that was made about the group chat. All right. It's just something that, as you're saying, Joe, it continues. All right. And we're going to continue to get it from this administration because right from the top, we have someone who will not accept responsibility for making mistakes. And he's got his entire staff and cabinet terrorized. All right. But there are some Republican voices in the wilderness. I'm happy to say that are not accepting this sort of behavior. I saw Congressman Bacon from Nebraska interviewed last night, and the guy was he struck me as being very impressive. Former brigadier.
I like Don Bacon. I always have.
I was impressed. Former brigadier general.
Yeah.
And he was making no excuses whatsoever for what happened, and really has said what I was saying, that it's the cover-up. It's the failure to take responsibility and accountability. That's what's dangerous. And so,
well, I want to ask the doctor about that professionally. Why, psychologically, do you think our leaders across the political spectrum are so incapable of admitting when they've done something wrong?
Yeah, I think if I knew that, I would be more than just a doctor. But I just think that
you're the closest we have to be able to make that assessment.
I was actually going to make the same comment, that it happens on both sides. Like, for example, what I was very, very disappointed with is that all these people who were promoting that Joe Biden is cognitively stable, and they were all saying things like anybody from Schumer to Mayorkas that they had to really prepare themselves because he could find the minutest detail if they did not know, and that would be so embarrassing. And, once we saw the debate, then suddenly everything changed. So, there was almost like an organized conspiracy to promote, to deny the obvious, which people then found out. So why is that? So the only way I can think about it is that for some reason, many politicians finds it to their advantage not to admit to mistakes, because if they do, the other side could potentially use it against them. Now that's not a psychological explanation. I mean, if you are a narcissist, you generally do not admit to mistakes because that would sort of challenge your sense of self-worth. But I couldn't say that each and every politician is a narcissist. By the way, I saw the same interview with Don Bacon, and he said the exactly correct things. He said that they should just say, okay, we messed up, I am sorry, and it will not happen again. But nobody seems to be able to say that on either side. Joe Biden never admitted the mistakes he made about relaxing the Trump orders on the border. That was definitely a mistake, but he never admitted to it. They never do.
Right. I mean, so many of these stories really would be much shorter news cycle stories if they would just say, "Our bad. We won't do it again. We've corrected whatever mistake we made, and let's move on." It's the fact that they keep change. I mean, again, to your point, this isn't unique to Donald Trump and his team, but all of these politicians continue to bob and weave and make different excuses as time goes on, instead of just owning up to the fact that people make mistakes. You're human.
Don Baker has a military sense of leadership and responsibility. Leadership 101 dictates that when things go awry, you basically admit to your own ignorance. The sound leadership. But we have no sound leadership. So that's going to be a given, especially with someone who is at the top of this food chain. He's never going to admit it, and basically he's condoned it. So stuff like this is going to continue to happen, hopefully without dire consequences.
In my U.S. History 2 classes currently, we're wrapping up World War II, and we just talked about Operation Overlord and D-Day and all of this. And Dwight Eisenhower, who's somebody I admire a tremendous amount. I mean, I worked at his farm briefly in college because he lived in Gettysburg, where I went to school. But when the D-Day operation was launched, he wrote a letter to the American public, which never wound up needing to be published, but it was uncovered later in his files, where he took full responsibility in the event it went absolutely wrong. If the worst case scenario that all of the analysts were giving him about what casualty rates might be, and if it was a failure, that he would take 100% responsibility himself and resign and apologize to the American public for this disastrous operation. I mean, that's leadership in my perspective, is what Eisenhower was willing to do and thankfully did not have to do because the operation was a success. But I don't know, is that just something of a bygone era that people have changed over time? Was that I mean, he wasn't exactly greatest generation because he was older, but is that something of that period that just we've lost in America? Or is it just, was he a unique individual and I shouldn't be trying to compare other people to Dwight Eisenhower?
Well, there's another profile in courage, ironically, to the person who succeeded him as president during the Cuban Missile Crisis. JFK acknowledged the errors and the myopic view of what was going on in Cuba to the American public, and he was honest with the American public. I think that he was part of the greatest generation. But subsequent to that, you'd have to look at, Nixon showed no courage in being honest or basically leveling with the American people. He obfuscated at the drop of a hat, which his lies basically have been quadrupled by Donald Trump. But I think another profile in courage, too, was Jimmy Carter. Not exactly the best president. I don't think historians will ever rate him as that. He was a better ex-president. But the whole kerfuffle with basically the hostage crisis in Iran, and I think he was honest to the last day. You flash forward to St. Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan and Herbert Walker Bush were never honest with the American people, and basically both were members of the greatest generation. So you couldn't tag the greatest generation with the leadership qualities that we look for stable government and good policy, or just leveling with the American people. Maybe Trump is leveling with the American people when he says that basically the economy is going to have a downturn and there's not much we can do about a recession. Is that honesty? By his own doing, but maybe that's the most honest thing he's ever said.
The only problem is he only said it when it already turned down.
And don't harangue him about the cost of eggs.
But I mean, I think it's a really good question. Is it any different? But I have a sense that now most of these politicians are mostly interested about winning, and they do whatever it takes they think will help them win. So this issue of integrity and honesty is playing second fiddle. And, I'm very interested myself about this issue of the debt, because I think that's going to kill us internally. Forget about the external threats. But the reason I'm mentioning it right now is that the only person who was actually honest about it was Chris Christie, because he said that we have to do something about Social Security, we need to do something about Medicare, we need to do something about a debt. But he had absolutely no traction. So the problem is also that the electorate, they want benefits, but they don't want to tighten their belt. They want benefits. They don't want to increase taxes. And the politicians are just kind of playing into it. So I think the responsibility is both, that people need to understand that sometimes you need to sacrifice, and the politicians need to tell the bitter truth, which sometimes it is bitter. But nobody is willing to do that.
We never hear from the lips of President Trump the word debt. You don't hear it. You hear it from some other Republicans, and now you're hearing it from some Democrats. But Trump will not and does not mention the debt issue at all. And we can go down that road if we want to talk about the economics and whatever. I don't know if that's where we want to go, but
I think that's a good segue to the tariffs.
We can do that. Yeah, let's do that. I just want to give a last little thought here on this topic, and then we'll move on and we'll talk about economics and tariffs and all of that. Which is I want to say one last thing about Pete Hegseth and this current team. He should not have ever been confirmed as defense secretary. We've said that before. I don't want to totally beat a dead horse, but he wasn't qualified for the job. But, thinking back to history, being a history teacher, he came very close to having his nomination defeated. If Tom Tillis wasn't so worried about a primary challenge next year in North Carolina, he, I think, would have voted against him and he would have had his nomination defeated. The last time we had a cabinet nominee have his nomination defeated in the Senate was an incoming Republican president nominated somebody for Secretary of Defense who had a problem with drinking on his record, who had a problem with womanizing on his record, allegations of misconduct with women, and who had some financial improprieties in his past. That sounds an awful lot like Pete Hegseth, and yet it was John Tower back in 1989, was nominated by George H.W. Bush and had his nomination defeated for Secretary of Defense because of those allegations in his past. And Bill, who did we get as Secretary of Defense because John Tower was defeated?
Was that Donald Rumsfeld?
Rumsfeld.
Yeah. No, who?
Bush Senior Secretary of Defense was Dick Cheney.
Oh God.
Oh yes.
who was Rumsfeld was already in the administration.
Yes.
Who pushed Cheney?
Yes.
They had worked together in the Nixon.
They were friends from the Ford administration, from the Nixon and Ford administration. But that was the last time a nominee was defeated. It was the Secretary of Defense nominee whose resume and whose problems sound an awful lot like Pete Hegseth's resume and problems. And, well, this time he got through and we're dealing with a mess. So
hey, Hegseth never went hunting with anybody and shot him in the face.
Neither did John Tower.
Neither did John Tower.
Okay, if we want to move on to economics, we can move on to economics. But I wanted to point that out because I was thinking about that this morning as I was driving into work. So 25% tariff on cars just announced today. Anybody planning to get a new car sometime soon and want to pay $12,000 more?
There's an ulterior motive for the whole thing because Trump said yesterday that the tariffs will basically improve America's financial condition by $100 billion in recouping. He doesn't realize that nobody's going to be buying anything, so there's not going to be any increased tax revenue coming in. And by the way, why does he want $100 billion? He's got to pay for those tax breaks that he's going to be giving people when he extends the 217 law. And if that's the reason, it's completely absurd because we're going to basically be pushed right into a recession, which I think he ultimately knows is going to be the outcome. And I guess he figures he's got almost 2 years to figure his way out of a mess like this before the midterms. I guess the Republicans won't be holding any town halls for a long time.
You mean it isn't about fentanyl?
The 5 pounds of fentanyl that come from Canada?
Yeah. Now you tell me about more absurdity. And not that I don't think any of us here need to pat ourselves on the back, but I think we all knew right from the start that the tariff proposal was to raise revenue. I mean, pure and simple. And he finally got around to saying it. And I don't know where these tariffs are going to lead, though, to be frank. I'm not expert enough to know.
I don't think it's too hard to envision what the unintended consequences is going to be. It's going to be basically less people building automobiles. If he thinks that there are going to be factories in the United States to make up for the production loss of automobiles, the economy goes sour, number one. unemployment goes up. I mean, does he see any of this on the horizon as consequences to these actions? I don't know who he's punishing. I honestly don't. I think he's punishing the American people.
But Bill, he doesn't.
I think no, I think I have slightly different point of view. I mean, I did study it a little bit, and Europe was actually tariffing us at 10%. So the American cars were taxed by the Europeans at 10%, while we were only taxing the European cars by 2.5%. And if you look at it globally, Europe does tax a little more than US, but it's only about 2%. If you look at global, all the trade in goods, but it's all kind of depends on what it is. But on cars, they were taxing us at 10%, while we were taxing them at 2.5%. So the problem that I find with him is that he kind of bullies people and kind of manipulates people, and he will say he will impose a tariff, and then tomorrow he will sort of change it again, and he's trying to get various concessions, But the problem is the business doesn't like that. The business leaders, or in order to run a business, you have to have predictability. You cannot, because let's say if there's going to be a tariff, then they have to know there will be that tariff also in the future, so they can plan, or vice versa. But he's doing it in a kind of very haphazard and bullying kind of way. And as a result, the economy will be destabilized. And also some of these European leaders and other leaders may say, well, F you, we are going to fight you back. And then you will have a tariff war, which will not help anybody.
No, I don't think the world.
That's what's going to happen.
Not only the United States.
Sorry?
It's not only the United States' economy that'll take the hit. I mean, it'll be a world.
Oh, yeah, worldwide. There will be a worldwide problem if something doesn't change. Because if there is a tariff war, everybody will be imposing tariffs on everybody else. And there will be a huge inflation all over the world. And, the IRAs will plummet. The stock market will go down. It's going to be a disaster.
Well, we're looking at next Wednesday, April 2nd is when the tariffs come into play. April 3rd, I take it back. So that's a week from today.
But I think there needs to be a conversation, friendly, kind of professional conversation about how to equalize it, because it is true that to some extent we were being taken advantage of by some of these countries who would impose more tariffs on us than we would impose on them.
Well, I want to ask this, and I don't mean it to be flippant, but do we all think Donald Trump actually understands what tariffs are and how they work?
No, not at all.
I think he understands it. I think he understands it to the degree that he thinks it's going to raise a significant amount of revenue. But I'm a little more confused about the tariff situation, about what the ramifications will be. On the face of it, you have to think that, of course, there'll be inflation. And the question then goes back to, well, is it going to be, to use a dirty word, transitory or not? And to follow up on what the doc said, I thought that we were hearing about tariffs being reciprocal. And reciprocity, I thought, means equal to some degree. So if the Europeans are imposing tariffs on our automobiles at 10%, you think the answer would be, all right, we will do the same. But of course, we have President Trump, who likes to use leverage, and he comes up with 25%. I wouldn't be shocked that ultimately that 25% number gets reduced to 10%. But I still don't know where it all goes, because I think I know enough that if we have a world trade war, tariff war that we are in for some potentially dire economic consequences.
Well, think of it this way. The trading partners that basically import cars into the United States. Japan leads the list. Europe is not too far behind either one of number one and number two is China. I was pretty surprised to hear that. I guess they found a market with electric cars or something coming into the U.S. Now think about China in terms of this trade war. What they could do. Are they going to basically call in all the debt they bought from the United States? Are we going to pay that out? Can you see the sad implication of that? I mean, that's a heavy duty consequence that I hope that people are accounting for.
My bigger concern with China is that they slap a tariff on, say, American agricultural exports to China, making American agriculture, things like soybeans, more expensive in China, and they wind up finding another source for that, which
they already have. They already have
American agriculture even more.
Yeah, because the farmers are up in arms because it doesn't seem like the government is responding to it.
That's the top thing America exports is agricultural products to the rest of the world. So,
yeah, I think the other thing which I found very unfortunate is when he campaigned. I mean, he did say he will use tariffs, but he also said he's going to relax regulations and produce more energy. And if you remember, when he won, the stock market jumped by like 1,500 points in one day. But that was based on those two things. But unfortunately, he focused on the tariffs and the tariff war, which I haven't had any economist who feels it's a good idea, but completely ignores the other two things, the idea of energy production and the idea of reducing regulations. So he focused on the wrong thing. But, ultimately, if people suffer and if the economy goes down the drain, then he's going to become less popular, and most likely the Democrats will win in the midterm. That would be my guess.
But he also, going back to how he campaigned, he said he was going to do tariffs, but he also said they wouldn't raise prices. That's just, that doesn't make sense.
No.
That's why I'm wondering if he actually understands how tariffs work. I mean, he seems that and maybe it's just bluster of how he talks about it, that it's just, well, foreign countries will have to pay us money if they want to sell us things here, and everything else will stay the same. And again, I don't know if that's just how he talks about tariffs publicly because it works for people who want to hear that message, or if that's genuinely what he thinks tariffs are.
Whoever's in his ear last gets basically that to resonate in his cranium. I think he's listening too much to Peter Navarro.
Because I think back during the campaign, he was interviewed by Bloomberg News in an event. And in live time, he said this line about, I'll have tariffs, but prices will not go up at all. And the reporter immediately said, but that's what tariffs do. And he just said, no, they don't. And then moved on. And he said, you're fake news, basically.
He said that I'm smart like Fredo. I went to Wharton.
The only thing which I don't know, but the question is, you could argue, I mean, he has other smart people there, like the Lutnick, who's the Commerce Secretary, and the Treasury Secretary, what's his name? I forget his name. But, these people are smart people who worked on Wall Street and have their own firm. So, if he doesn't understand it, wouldn't they tell him that tariffs are not going to...
Would they? I mean, that's one of my curiosities about this administration. I don't know if anybody's actually telling him the things that he doesn't want.
Nobody's telling the emperor he has no clothes.
It's just,
That's my curiosity, because we don't know. Are people telling him, or are they just telling him what he wants to hear?
I think that's the case. Unfortunately, is that people are very reticent to give him a contrary point of view. And Billy mentioned Peter Navarro. Whoever mentioned Peter Navarro is one of the loudest mouths I've ever heard in government service. That guy is a blowhard, all right? And I don't know whether he really believes everything he's saying either. Unfortunately, I think he does. But I agree that he seems to have some sway over Trump.
Well, having seen quite a bit of Peter Navarro, I think he says less in more words than anybody I've ever seen.
Yep.
But I mean, I don't want to keep being the guy, you know.
Trump. He defied Congress, went to jail, and then basically did something that Trump never got. He got punished for that.
Well, that's true, and you're right, Billy. And I'm sure that serves him extremely well with Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm a broken record, but as a conservative, I remember when we believed in free trade as being good for the consumers because it lowers prices. I don't know when conservatives stopped believing that.
Trump did in 2017. He passed that new NAFTA Act, which he changed the name of it and got a good deal with Canada and Mexico. Now he's going back on it because you know what? You can't take him at his word. He's not going to honor stuff. So, I mean, he's already broken something he did in his first administration.
Well, that's true.
Evil Canadians. You got to watch out for them.
Oh, God.
And the Irish, how the Irish have taken advantage of us over the years. He said, Prime Minister of Ireland.
There is a very good movie. I don't know if any of you saw it, called The Apprentice, and it's about Donald Trump. I mean, it's really well done. It's about him and Roy Cohn. Did you see it or?
I saw it.
I have not.
So I thought that pretty much explains the situation pretty well.
Yeah, it just came out this past year. It actually got one or two Oscar nominations. It didn't win anything.
It did. You're right. I think for supporting actor or whatever. But
for main actor was Sebastian Stan, and then Jeremy Strong was Roy Cohn. They both got the nomination.
A nomination.
Yeah,
it was good.
Yes.
So, well, if he was alive, he'd basically be the Attorney General.
Well, as soon as Roy Cohn got HIV and eventually died of AIDS, Trump basically dumped him.
Yep, wanted nothing to do with them anymore.
Right.
Hey, can we pose this question to Eddie? What about that appointment to the federal prosecutor in New Jersey of that great example of prudence? Alina Habba.
Yeah,
we're laughing at this. This is
the interim guy, Giordano, who was there for 4 weeks. He gets appointed as ambassador to Namibia, which is it's a consolation prize, I guess.
Which, if you remember from Trump's first term, he clearly had never heard of that country because he kept calling it Zambia.
Well, you know what? It'll be interesting. Seriously, now it'll be interesting to see whether she actually gets confirmed at some time in the future as the permanent U.S. attorney for New Jersey. I think that's very much up in the air. But she can stay as the acting forever.
Forever.
Yeah. So happened with a lot of his appointments in his first administration.
Yeah. So she might not even ever come up for hearings before the Senate, which would probably be a smart move by Trump. All right.
What about Jet fans in New Jersey? The biggest thing they were hoping for is that their owner was going
Woody
back.
Johnson would be back in the administration.
And Woody's out in the cold. What did he do to offend Trump?
Well, his wife ran over and killed somebody in England, and they actually got caught for it. Although they didn't face any consequences.
Of course not. Of course not. His travesty was the way he ran the Jets. I mean, unbelievable. And that's a conversation for another day, Eddie. The Giants.
Yeah. Now the Giants are going to be loaded with quarterbacks.
Yeah. Hopefully, I'm just going to pose this, and I shouldn't stray a little bit, but I have to.
We can stray.
The number 3 pick. Do they take Shedeur Sanders?
No, they shouldn't, in my opinion. Especially.
I agree.
Especially now.
I think Mara wants no part of his father, because think of the pressure that will happen when he gets rid of a lot of them, and the drum starts to beat to hire Shador Sanders' dad. You know, Showtime.
I don't think so either, and I really don't think it should happen.
No,
frankly.
of course not. No, I don't think
No.
even. I don't think his kid is that good. He's not a. I don't. You know, I don't think there's a quarterback in this draft who's going to come in and start. Period. You know. But anyway, let's get back to politics. Instead of the opiate of the people, sports.
Yeah.
So what else are we watching for this coming week? We got about 10 minutes left for our recording. What are we looking for?
Do we think to go back to one of our initial topics? I mean, do we think that this issue concerning the classified, and it clearly was classified stuff, do we think that that is an issue that's going to have legs? I don't know. I don't
think so. I think the one that's looming is the showdown with the courts. They basically have already defied the courts with regard to the issue with the deportation of Venezuelan immigrants who were under that law, that temporary law. And they basically put them on a plane and sent them back. They also sent people back to another spot, and I can't think of it right now, where they paid the government of that country $6 million. It was almost like a bribe, to take back these expatriated people. I think the issue is that it's indiscriminate with regard to law-abiding citizens. I don't think any American has any problem with criminals being deported. And I think that there was a mandate to do that. But I think it's indiscriminate in terms of the people they scoop up. And there are a lot of people who have no criminal records who are basically being deported. So I think that issue in the courts is going to be.
Billy, we don't know how many people have been deported because you didn't get. There's no transparency. There's no transparency. All right. I don't know how many people. I don't think the number is that great.
I don't think so either.
And I'm not trying to minimize the issue that you're raising, but I agree with your analysis. I don't think there are too many people here who are of the mind that illegal aliens who commit crimes should not be deported. But we're concerned, and of course the ruling yesterday, the 2-1 ruling by the Court of Appeals, affirmed what the district judge did on that issue, and it's going to wind up in the Supreme Court. And we will see.
I think that's I think what Billy said, in my opinion, is very important, because what's going to happen if the president, and I don't know who he is, defies the judicial orders, because the court does not have any army behind them, so they have no power. So they are kind of only going by tradition. So what happens if president defies, let's say, an order of the Supreme Court?
Yeah,
now in this particular case, the question is, and I think it's in a way good that it will go to the Supreme Court, because the question is, let's say there is a district court judge who doesn't like the president, right? If such a situation happens, he could potentially undermine all kinds of orders that the president gives. So the Supreme Court has to come up with some guidance, how to deal with that. Maybe there should be a panel of judges, because, who knows? I mean, to me, not as a lawyer, but just observing it, these guys, nobody said any of these guys are like U.S. citizens or even dreamers. They were all illegal immigrants, and many of them were gang members. So, it's hard to have any sympathy for them. So,
if that's the case,
the question, well, nobody says that.
How do we know that?
I don't know. So that's one of my, it's kind of hard to feel like they should bring them back, given who they are. I am all for immigration, but I'm totally against illegal immigration. Being a legal immigrant, the legal immigrants feel we have done it the right way. So why should people who come in, just crossing the border illegally is an illegal act. So even if they didn't commit any crimes here, they still came in illegally, so they did commit a crime.
Mike, I got a question for you. If in fact someone is born here and has birthright citizenship, should they be deported?
No. But nobody, Billy, nobody's.
But also,
nobody.
You don't think that's a bridge too far?
No, Billy, nobody. No, now look, I have to. Look, I'm as skeptical about Trump and the administration as anyone, but I have not heard anybody propose that somebody who was born here in the United States is subject to these to this policy of deportation.
And my issue, I mean, I have a couple of things I want to respond to, especially things that the doctor was saying in his answer. Number one is that I want to talk just briefly about he's trying to use the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to deport people.
Right.
The Alien Enemies Act of 1798, okay, says in it, if you read the text, which again, conservatives, I thought we're all about the text of the law, says that you can deport people without due process, and that's a key part of this, if they are members of an enemy nation in the time of war or invasion. And they're using this theory that illegal immigration is an invasion, right? You hear that rhetoric on Fox News and places, but that is clearly not what the people who wrote the Alien Enemies Act in 1798 meant when they used the word invasion. I mean, I thought, again, as conservatives like Donald Trump, like his judicial supporters like Judge Alito, believe in interpreting what did the people mean when they wrote the law. And that is not what somebody in 1798 meant by the word invasion. That might be a modern connotation that right-wing media is giving to the word invasion, but it is not what the original intent of the law was. And that's being used to deny the due process part of deportation. I don't have any issue with somebody who's here illegally getting deported. I think, like the doctor said, they've broken a law just by coming here. But they're due process just by being people who we're putting through the system to deport. And these people are just being rounded up and removed without that due process part because they're using that interpretation of the Alien Enemies Act. That's one issue I have. Number two, I agree with something the doctor said, that there is an issue with if you just have a district judge somewhere who doesn't like the administration, any case can be brought to that judge and they can put a stay on whatever the administration is trying to do. And that doesn't make any sense. That's a legitimate challenge to what some of these district judges are doing. And if you look at some of the arguments the government is making in things like the deportation case, that's what they're actually arguing. They're arguing that this district judge in wherever it is, Delaware, Rhode Island, or whatever it is, whatever district judge they brought these things to, should not be able to put a national TRO, temporary restraining order, on some of these executive orders. It should only apply to his district. And I think that's a legitimate legal argument, that a district judge should not be able to nationally block something a president is trying to do, because the Biden administration faced the same thing. There's judges in West Texas that conservative groups like and District Attorney Abbott were bringing everything to in Texas and getting national restraining orders on these Biden executive orders. I think that's a legitimate argument, but sometimes they're not even arguing the actual meat of what they're trying to do. They're arguing that little technical argument, and that has to be settled by the Supreme Court. So I just wanted to say,
Joe, I agree. I agree with you 100% with everything you just said, and it was well said. And that's why of course these district judges are subject to appeal to the Court of Appeals, which we saw, and you're absolutely right about the Alien Act, the Illegal Alien Act. There's no way that it was intended for this sort of situation. Now, it'll be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see where this goes with the Supreme Court, and that's where it's going.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I'm going to give you an early prediction. I'm going to give you an early prediction on that, though. I think the Supreme Court is going to rule that it does not apply to these circumstances.
Well, from your mouth to God's ear.
Well, we'll see. I might be wrong. I mean, that's just I just from looking at the lay of the land with the Supreme Court right now, with just Chief Justice Roberts
And Amy Coney.
and Amy Coney Barrett, I'm getting a feel that there's maybe some more moderation there than we might have thought.
Well, maybe they're thinking about their own legacy on the Supreme Court. There've been
Oh, I think so.
Well, judges
I
always
think
do.
you're
I don't
right.
think that should be something we kind of say in like a derogatory way about them. That's something that judges always do. Think about their
No,
life.
absolutely. I mean, do you want to be the next Roger B. Taney? I mean, it'll be interesting to see how that lines up. And by the way, thank God for the appeals court then, because the appeals court is your fail-safe mechanism.
Yeah.
Okay, we have 3 minutes left, so listeners, you know how this works. We record during my free period, so I'm going to have another class coming in a few minutes. But I just want to go quickly around, give everybody a minute for your last thoughts on any of the topics we talked about, or what listeners should be looking to in this next week or 2 weeks. And we'll start with Bill.
Well, we'll look for the deadline, the April 3rd deadline with the tariffs, to see if this is a negotiating ploy or if we're going to basically go off the cliff economically.
Okay, Doctor.
Yeah, I mean, I think we live in interesting times, and I'm just kind of excited about having these conversations and see where it goes. And I mean, I think it's democracy working. Different people have different opinions, and it will be just fascinating. At one point, I would like to focus on this issue. I mean, I'm very interested in the issue of the national debt and Medicare, Medicaid, cost cutting. That would be, I think, a good discussion to have as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that as a topic on an episode soon. We'll devote time to that. I didn't mean to cut you off if you were still sorry.
No, I'm just saying thank you very much for a wonderful conversation.
Judge?
To follow up on what Billy said, I wouldn't be surprised that we don't see changes as far as these tariffs, either the rate or even the imposition thereof. Based on what we've seen so far, I think we're going to see more changes.
And I over these next couple of weeks, I do want to see if there's any actual continued fallout for Waltz, Hegseth, and even Tulsi Gabbard, who we never brought up really in our conversation today. But she strained the truth in her testimony to Congress, to put it generously, about these issues. So, I mean, that's what I'll be watching for, is about, and to see if I get my invite anytime soon to the next bombing run. It hasn't come yet. So everybody out there, certainly send in to us your questions, your thoughts on our discussion today. We can be reached, as always, at Wigs for Wigs. That is WIGSFORWHIGS @gmail.com. We do love hearing from you. You can hear your thoughts on a future episode, and we hope we'll connect with you again soon for another episode of Wigs for Wigs. Take care, everybody.